All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. Jenny, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. Very happy to have my guest, Dr. Jennifer King. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. I'm so happy to be here.
All right. So Jenny is a trauma therapist turned academic, an assistant professor and co-director of the Center on Trauma and Adversity in the Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. King's works to prepare future social workers to engage in practice that is rooted in the neurobiology of trauma and healing and embodies great reverence for the multitude of ways survivors survive. She draws from her practice experience working with traumatized kids and families to create the types of learning opportunities and supports she needed when she was a new therapist in the field. Dr. King is the chair of the Graduate Certificate in Trauma-Informed Practice Program and the director of the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics Fellowship Program. When do you sleep? Through a partnership with Dr. Bruce Perry and the Neurosequential Network, she created the first comprehensive program to train social work students in this innovative neurobiologically-informed model via classroom instruction and field experience. She's also a mom to 3, an unschooler, a wife, partner, daughter, sister, friend, colleague, and human in the year of 2021. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, that's like a lot of words, huh?
That's a lot of words, but a lot of words I wanted to include. So I want to get to unschooling very briefly, but before share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are now.
It's the same answer to both questions. I'm from the Cleveland, Ohio area originally, and I left and went a couple other places and then came back. So I'm in Cleveland now. Our extended family is here. And so with the little ones, it was a good decision to come back home and have grandparents nearby and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. So I saw in your bio an unschooler, and that's very interesting to me because when this whole pandemic hit, our kids, like everyone else, practically were forced at home and online. And it just seemed to suck the soul out of our 13-year-old. And it started a really great conversation between my wife and I about what is schooling, what do we want, blah, blah, blah. And we came across unschooling. I just want to get into this briefly.
Sure, yeah.
Just explain briefly what it is and how you decided to do it.
Yeah, so unschooling is essentially the idea that learning is happening all the time. Learning happens naturally and organically, and sometimes best outside of the parameters of compulsory schooling. So we view sort of the world as our classroom, the community as our classroom, and we don't necessarily follow any sort of curriculum. It's very much child-led and child-centered, which for our family, I think it aligns just really well with the way that my kids learn and have developed. So there's, I think, sort of like a natural self-direction with my kids. But what was really striking for us was that we are able then to kind of follow not only their interests, but also their pace and where their interests lie and progress. Like when we were looking at, my son was a young 5, he's a September birthday. So we were kind of like, we had that conversation about, do we send, hold back, whatever. He academically, as like an academic 5-year-old, was quite advanced. And when we looked at, the kindergarten standards, he had already learned a lot of what was there on his own. So we thought, let's give him a year to play, right? Let's just, see how he spends his time. We'll help kind of guide what he's interested in, but let's just let him be a kid. And as we did that, that was the year before COVID, we realized that he was still gathering so much knowledge and retaining so much knowledge because he was doing it on his own.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how we landed there. We have a cooperative that we've started with some other families. So they have a lot of social time, a lot of free play time, but it really, I think COVID offered, or maybe forced, the opportunity to think a little bit differently about learning and about education, and the fact that, between the hours of 9 and 3, sitting still may not be the way that kids learn best.
Right. Now, are you thinking about this, up until a certain age or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about sort of leveling the power differential where we can. So it will be an ongoing conversation with my kids if it's something they want to continue with, or if they're curious about compulsory school. They did each do a year of pre-K, and it's interesting because they'll tell people, I can't believe how much the teachers tell you what to do. So I don't know how interested they'll be, but that's, it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay. All right. Let's get into this. What a background you have. How the heck did you get into this field?
So I think that, like a lot of folks that end up in helping positions and professions, we found out really early that we were people that other people came to when they had problems, when they had stories, whatever. And I kind of very early fell in love with that role of being the person that somebody will vent to. I remember being probably like 13, 14, and my older sister would have been 17 at the time. I remember her friends coming over and literally lying on our couch and me sitting there just listening to them vent about whatever was going on. I think there was something about that, being able to like hold and contain for folks, that felt really, really nice to me. And so I think, I pursued psychology first, like many of us do. And then just kind of experiences in college and in life, wanted to make sure that my learning and my practices were rooted in social justice too.
Well, hold on. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Can you give us one of those experiences that made you want to pursue social justice?
Yeah. So one of my first jobs after I graduated college was in a partial hospitalization, so a sort of a mandatory group program for kids who had been involved with the juvenile justice system. And in hearing those kids' stories, I think it became very clear to me a lot of the inequities that maybe I wasn't as aware of before became really clear, just hearing what they'd been through, how they had been treated by the different systems that they've interacted with. Majority young Black men at that time in that position. And so, I think that being able to locate the person in the environment felt really important to me, because there's so much more that's happening outside of our individual stories that have a big impact on us.
So how do things unfold such that you become aware of and specifically pursue trauma?
I mean, that was sort of the thread that has tied all of my work together. So certainly, as you can imagine, that example that I just gave, there was a good deal of trauma in those kids' lives. But I think every piece of practice that I've engaged in with different populations and different settings, that's the thread that has tied it all together. And I was particularly interested in how we come to understand trauma in kids. Because working in an elementary school, I worked as a school-based counselor in an elementary school for a while. And I don't think I felt particularly skilled at getting a real understanding of what kids had seen and been through. Because so many of the tools and things we have available to us rely on their grown-ups reporting. So that was what I chose to go back and get my doctorate for and sort of pursue, is just different ways of understanding kids' experiences in ways that are a little bit more just developmentally appropriate.
So what specifically was that doctorate in?
Clinical social work
Okay.
at the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay. So that's very interesting to me. So share with us how you might learn what a kid's gone through. or is going through or is experiencing?
Yeah. So I think naturally what happened was that some of those stories would come out much later on in the therapeutic relationship, where, as you know, part of our job up front is to get some sort of sense of what's going on, because we often have to diagnose and make treatment plans and all of those things. So while it's of course understandable that those things come out or are disclosed once trust is built, I think having a way to very quickly screen for traumatic experiences in little ones is a helpful thing, because the problem with disclosures coming later is sometimes we've already made clinical decisions based on diagnoses that are not trauma related and should be, right? So I developed pictorial tools that utilize cartoon pictures alongside the items, so that kids can use that sort of as like a visual aid if they have reading or language issues, if they're too young to really read and answer a question themselves, or if they just bore quickly, which, you know, a lot of the kids do.
So for example, what might one of these pictures look like, and try to assess for?
Yeah, we just updated, or I guess created a new tool, a new brief pictorial tool as part of a grant project that I'm on here in the state of Ohio. And we are using emoji faces as part of that, which we're finding really helpful, because that's sort of somehow become a universal language, even with little kids. Like they see and understand what's being depicted in the faces. So it's mostly the facial expressions. There might be like a body language piece of that too. So there might be sort of like a physical cowering with a scared face and big grown-ups, pretend grown-ups in the background, that kind of thing.
So how did you come to the Center on Trauma and Adversity at Case Western?
So we, when I started at Case, there was a center that was kind of not in operation anymore. And there was the opportunity to re-envision what it might look like to create something new. And so in looking across our faculty, similar to my practice experience, trauma was a thread that tied many of our research interests and our practice experiences together. And in the academic world, people's research areas tend to be really specific and narrow, right? Whereas clinicians, it's not that way. We see whoever walks into our office. And so we started having conversations among the other folks whose work more directly touched on trauma. And my co-director, Dr. Megan Holmes, and I, in sort of the leadership visioning of that, Dr. Holmes is incredibly skilled on the research side of things, many other things as well. But I wanted to use that opportunity to really leverage learning for our students. So to create some new training opportunities and things for our students, so that they're just a little better prepared for what they might be seeing in the field. And now, I mean, that was before COVID. So now, I mean, I think it's even more important that trauma therapists are coming into the field with a pretty solid kind of toolbox at their disposal, not just for serving their clients, but also their own care and self-regulation and management of what they're dealing with on top of what their clients are. And that's a piece that I think it's hard.
Yeah. That sounds awesome. So specifically, what do you think students, a student coming into the program needs to know? But before you answer that question, I want to know, when you first started and you were working with those young kids at that partial hospitalization program, and you were becoming aware of trauma, how did you respond to that? Because, I mean, trauma is crazy and affects us all in different varying ways, and it's intense.
It's intense.
For you personally, when you started seeing that, how did you take that in? What was your reaction and response?
I mean, I didn't respond very well. I can tell you that.
Meaning what?
I think that I was personally impacted by the stories that I heard, not necessarily in the moment. I think in the moment I was able to hold and contain whatever was coming up, but kind of afterwards, even if I wasn't consciously aware of it, I would have dreams, for example, where themes of things that I had heard would come up. I started getting migraines. I think my personal relationships were impacted. I was shorter and more irritable with the people who were closer to me. I don't feel like I had strengthened the muscles needed to kind of be able to do that work in a way that was sustainable for me. So secondary trauma wasn't anything that I knew about when I was first in the field. Vicarious trauma, none of that. And so I think without that framing, I thought that I had made a mistake and that I just couldn't handle the work.
Right.
When in reality, you learn about secondary trauma, and it's a occupational hazard. It's a thing that comes up for many of us. And so helping folks to understand that is a thing and what to look out for is an important piece of the way that we train our students and other folks in the community.
Okay. Appreciate you sharing that. All right. So the other question was, you talked about wanting to equip those students with a full toolbox. Give us some idea of what you feel is necessary for people walking into this field and your program.
I think that a sort of a basic understanding of the brain and the nervous system and physiologically what happens during and after trauma, what to kind of look out for in our clients, and having a sense of what is reasonable for people to expect of them based on that information. I think sometimes our expectations of folks are just disrespectful considering where they are biologically or physiologically. The other big thing is, like I was saying, tools to strengthen that muscle of being able to stay in the work and stay with your patients without having sort of this outside of work challenges, things like relational stuff and health and all of the things that had happened to me early on. I think I try to do a good amount of offering skills and tools around self-regulation that they can be using. Certainly, they always want tools to teach their clients. That's the number one thing. Like, give me your favorite interventions, give me your favorite, exercises. And that's great. And certainly you teach them to your clients, but like, what are you doing in the 5 minutes between sessions? What are you doing when you become activated and you're sitting with somebody? How are you kind of metabolizing that?
Now, you talked about the importance of understanding the neurobiology of what's going on so that people aren't overestimating or over-expecting. Give us an example of that.
So I think, again, I'm thinking more specifically about kids. Kids in a school setting, I guess, is an easy example. So a child who has experienced chronic ongoing exposure to violence, maybe lives in a violent community, lives in an impoverished community, comes to the school having not had breakfast, gets there late, goes into their classroom and is expected to be able to sit, right, and attend.
It's crazy to think about,
right? And not react, and then do that all day long.
Right.
And it's like, that's not realistic. Right. It's not fair to expect that.
And of course, or not of course, but they're probably going to break down or freak out and have some kind of behavior, which is all anyone's going to react to, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. When in reality, if we were able to think about, what are our sort of rhythms and rituals as we welcome kids in, is there availability of snacks? I know my office was always full of granola bars and stuff that kids could grab. Do we offer opportunity for movement? Rather than taking that away as a punishment. I think that's the other thing. It's like you're quick to take the brief recess that they get away if they're behaving poorly or behaving inappropriately, when in reality, like, that's their opportunity to kind of get themselves back into a regulated space. You're hurting everybody by taking away gym or recess or whatever the case may be.
Right. That's such a great example. And I'm thinking to myself, there's something so sad in the fact that, or if the social worker or the therapist, right, the people you're educating, they have to wait to get to that person to receive this kind of care and this level of awareness. Obviously this is such a big issue, right? It needs to start somewhere so much sooner, but I guess we're not talking about that today. But what do you see? What are you recognizing in the people, in the students who are coming to your program? Do you feel, you're talking about that question, how are you able to deal with this? What do you do? Talk about that kind of self-responsibility in a sense.
Yeah, I think that our students, especially these past few years, the groups of students that have come through our on-ground program, which is the one that I teach in most, are very socially aware. They're very interested in social justice and advocacy, and they do a nice job naturally of blending like the direct practice with the more macro policy advocacy stuff, which is great because that's what we preach all the time, but we don't necessarily train students that way. Like you train to be a clinician or you don't. But I think that having lived through these past 2 years, they've all been affected differently by COVID in lots of different ways. And so there is a heightened level of stress as they enter into the program, certainly. And I think that has continued for them over the course of their time in the program, which is true of all of us. I think we've all been in sort of a sensitized, stressed out state. And so being able to perform the way that we might if we weren't in that state, it's just a lot trickier. But they're great. We get amazing students.
Do you find that there's, generally speaking, across the board, an understanding of the role that they themselves play in this work? Because oftentimes a lot of people, not most of us, get into this field because we want to help, right? We want to do all those great words. And I know for me, it became apparent at some point where I had to take ownership of who I was, and was I dealing with all my own stuff?
Yeah.
And wait a minute, I'm here to help this person. I got to look at myself.
Right.
What's your experience with that?
That is very real. And I think a challenge that students face right away. So I think the earliest piece of our curriculum, they're asked to do a lot of self-reflection and a lot of kind of thinking through about their positionality, who they are in the world, what that might mean to other folks, how that's perceived, that kind of thing. But I think it's sort of a joke that people say folks get into this work to either figure themselves out or figure somebody else out. But I do sometimes think that that's true. And that's something that you will be faced with early on. And you have to be. I mean, ideally, that's something that as you are beginning to learn, you're looking at versus 5 years down the line when you're sitting across from someone and suddenly you're sort of bombarded with all of these things that you hadn't examined before, which happens.
What's been your biggest struggle with this, with specifically working with trauma? I mean, can you share an early clinical error?
There's so few. I'm just kidding. There's so many. It's hard to even think of one. I think that there were times where I'm always telling my students that they have to get over themselves. We are not sort of the single savior for any child or family. And I think very early on, I put a lot of undue pressure on myself to be the one that's going to quote unquote fix this situation or stop this behavior, rather than instead thinking about like, how do I mobilize the folks around this kid or this family? How do I better support parents? I think that's another thing. To be engaging with kids in ways that are going to be helpful to them outside of our time together. I think young therapists, especially, tend to focus their clinical work on the kid, which is fine if you are also supporting caregivers and the grownups in the child's life to sort of help make those changes too. And I didn't do that, truthfully, and I should have.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics Fellowship Program. How did you get involved with that? And I want to remind everyone that the Neurosequential Model was created by Dr. Bruce Perry, who we love on this podcast. How did that come about for you?
So Dr. Perry was in Cleveland to do a talk, and I was there attending the talk. And during a break, kind of ran into him out in the hallway, and that Dr. Holmes was with me, my co-director, and he had recognized we use social media a lot just to share information and stuff about trauma and share resources and things like that. And he had recognized the name of our center from Twitter, which was surprising. Twitter is a powerful place. Developing therapists, I'm telling folks all the time, get on Twitter. Social work Twitter, therapist Twitter, it's a great place to be. Anyway, I had said to him in that conversation that I was hoping to create some training opportunities for our students, and he just offered to get in touch and to talk through what it would look like to certify a group of our faculty in NMT so that we could then teach it to our students who can then become certified too. So since that time, I think it's grown, and there are a couple other social work schools and maybe medical schools that offer a course in NMT. But we're the only one that has sort of this year-long, more immersive program that just allows them to move through it a little more slowly, because it's a lot.
Yeah, very cool. Now, is that something that only students in your program can go through? Okay.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who's interested can go to their website and get in contact with them about getting their organizations trained. But our deal is just for our students.
Okay. So look, you are very intense. I mean, obviously you've got a lot going on here. Your passion is palpable. What's driving you in this work?
I think just a belief that people deserve so much more than they are given, and that everyone deserves to live a whole and joyful life. And there are so many reasons that doesn't happen that are unjust and unacceptable. And any little bit of work that we can do to support folks in moving toward that wholeness, I think we have a responsibility to do in whatever our sphere of influence might be. I mean, I'm sure, you do stuff like that with your kids. I do that stuff with my kids, but I think whatever we can do, whatever we have the capacity and energy for, we have a responsibility to do.
So the program you're co-directing rather, Center on Trauma and Diversity, is that specifically for social workers, aspiring social workers?
Developing social workers.
Social workers. Okay.
Yep. It's our MSW, part of our MSW program.
Okay. And in addition to that, are you seeing clients privately?
I'm not. I have a goal of building that in somewhere. Okay. I'm not really finding a lot of openings for that
parallel
right now.
Universe.
But I do clinical consultation. So I'll help with cases that other clinicians are struggling with and do like little bits of supervision, but I'm not seeing clients right now.
Awesome. Okay. All right, Jenny, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
I am on social media at Dr. Jenny King on Instagram and Twitter. You can also email me. What is that email address? We'll just say my case email address, jak292@case.edu.
Okay. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Jenny, thank you so much. Just really appreciate you doing what you're doing. We need people like you, and I'd love to have you back.
Oh, thank you. I'd be happy to come back.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.